I am Kristen O'Bannon. I am the Senior Solutions Marketer for our for lifelong learning here at Modern Campus. And I want to welcome you to our webinar today. The power of micro-credentials is going to be a panel discussion on the impact on students, institutions, and employers. And we are lucky enough today to have representatives from across the board. So before we get started, just a few little housekeeping items. As you can see in the chat, folks are entering where they are from. We invite you, if you've just joined, to tell us where you're from and joining us today so we can see the diversity of our attendees. We do have quite a few people joining us today, which is fabulous for this popular topic. And I think we're going to have a great discussion here with representatives from both community college, university, as well as the employer sector. And but before we get started, you're welcome to use the chat. If you have any technical problems, Peyton, my colleague Peyton, is on. You are welcome to choose the Modern Campus option in the chat if you're having trouble, and he can address those technology problems as well. For Q&A, if you come across any questions you'd like to ask along the way, please do use the Q&A button. I will be monitoring those, but we will be using the last 10-15 minutes or so of our session today to make sure that we can get to as many, if not all, of your questions at the end. This session is being recorded, so never fear. If you have colleagues that you want to share this with after the fact, everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive the link to the recording. So with that, let me welcome our panelists. First, thank you all so much for joining us today. First, we have Dr. Ken LaValle from the University of New Hampshire. Ken is the Vice Provost for University Outreach and Engagement at the University of New Hampshire. Ken oversees a team of 200 educators from 9 university programs, reaching 150,000 New Hampshire residents and 30,000 non-traditional learners each year. So certainly a large impact there in the north. Also joining us today is Dr. Luke Dowden from the Alamo Colleges District in Texas. Luke is the Chief Online Learning Officer for the Alamo Colleges District. Through the Alamo Colleges Online, he leads and supports capacity building initiatives for all 5 community colleges so that each may gain a greater market share of online learners in San Antonio and South Texas. And finally, last but not least, we also have Dr. Patty Konstantakis from Walmart.org. She is the director of the Economic Opportunity Team for Walmart.org. She leads the foundation's portfolio that seeks to accelerate economic mobility for frontline workers through a more equitable talent system that uses skills and competencies as a foundation. She brings decades of experience working to increase economic opportunities for underserved adult learners. And then finally, I'd like to introduce you to Amrit Alwalia, who is going to be our host and moderator today of our discussion. Amrit is the chief editor-in-chief of The Evolution. With over 60,000 monthly visitors, The Evolution is an online publication that has become the go-to source for opinions and information on non-traditional higher education. With over 2,500 contributors, deans, presidents, hiring managers, government officials, etc., all probably represented here today on our webinar. The contributors write their own unfiltered content for The Evolution. So it is an unedited opportunity for sharing of thoughts and insights. As a leader in non-traditional higher education, Amrit's been the invited keynote at conferences for sharing insights and engaging discussion, as well as the host of the popular Illumination podcast. So Amrit, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to turn my camera off and start monitoring questions and such, and I will be back.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. We really do appreciate your interest in this topic. We appreciate your passion for transforming education in your own context. I want to start off by thanking Modern Campus for bringing us together for today's panel. As many of you know, and as Kristen alluded to, Modern Campus launched The Evolution over a decade ago to create visibility for transformation across the higher education space. And, today we're going to be deep diving a significant piece of that in talking about the evolving micro-credentialing space, which is, a segment that Modern Campus supports with its lifelong learning solutions. Formerly known as Destiny One and Lumens, Modern Campus Lifelong Learning has helped its customer institutions, which include Alamo Colleges and UNH, drive an average consistent annual revenue and enrollment growth of about 10% a year, while simplifying the management of alternative, innovative, and non-degree programs. If you are interested in learning more about Modern Campus Solutions, please do visit moderncampus.com. And with that, we're going to dive into our discussion. So Ken, Luke, Patty, thank you so much for taking the time out again to be part of this conversation. I'm curious, just as to help us level set, your reflections on sort of how the micro-credentialing space has evolved over the past 5 years. And Ken, I'll start with you there, please.
Thank you, Amrit. I'm happy to be here today. So what I've seen in the non-traditional alternative credentialing space over the last 5 years has been an interest that's transitioned from a badge terminology to more of a competency or a skill-based competency or skill-based validated thing that a learner ends up getting. So, but in addition to that, from a university perspective, we've seen them now be really, really interesting for a non-traditional market. In the Northeast, we're having some college age traditional student demographic declines that are causing serious competition between our New England universities. And one of the ways that we've seen this micro-credentialing evolve is creating different entry points for learners to get a workforce ready skill or competency without committing to a complete academic program or pathway. Not to mention, we're seeing a lot of professionals interested in popping into traditional classrooms that are teaching particular techniques or new methodologies in AI or computer science, cybersecurity. They can take a class as a non-matriculated student and are able to kind of have a university validated credential that indicates in a very rigorous way what they did, what they learned, how many contact hours, and how was their learning validated.
Thank you, Ken. Patty, I'll circle to you.
So, okay, thank you for having me here today. Before I start answering the question, I need to sort of give you a perspective on kind of my view of all of this. So, as Kristen said, I work for Walmart.org, which is essentially the philanthropic arm of Walmart. But I have a dual role as part of the foundation. I have a philanthropic portfolio of grantees that are doing work in this area, but I also serve as a subject matter expert to our business. So I am well entrenched with our learning and development teams and our talent acquisition teams and so on and so forth. And my role as a subject matter expert is actually to push them to change. And we bring everything that we've learned as part of our grant making and try to bring it into the business. And in the 4 years that I've been at Walmart, I have seen pretty significant changes. So I'll start with the sort of notion of micro-credentials and badges. Where has that been? What I'd say is the first thing I think has changed over the last 5 years or so has really been the narrative around it. I would say 5 years ago, what's micro-credential? What's a badge? Blah, blah, blah. Now we have, 500 people who understand what we mean by it and are, more open to exploring it. In particular and I'll take it from the employer perspective, right? From a badge and micro-credential, I can see Walmart and other employers at this point starting to perceive value in a short-term credential and having a badge and trying to explore it. So much more open to exploring micro-credentials than they ever have been. There's a piece of research though, good and bad, that SHRM has recently done, right? So the Society for HR Managers, they did a survey of their members, and 95% of employers surveyed said that they think that short-term credentials or skilled credentials is what SHRM calls them. They think those are important and they would definitely hire somebody who had a short-term credential. Awesome. But only 15% of them are actually doing it. So there's this huge gap between what we say we'll do and what we're actually doing, which I think we can talk more about kind of some of those obstacles. But the last thing I'd say is that there's also a big explosion of them, right? So the organization that's Credential Engine says there's like over 1 million short-term credentials at this point. That's a lot. That's the wild, wild west at this point. And so there's a lot of like, how do we make sense of that? And if you are an employer, that's one of the big challenges here. So lots and lots of change, but with change comes, opportunity is probably what I'd say there.
Absolutely. And Luke, pivoting to you.
I would certainly agree with what Ken and Patty said, and live through that period of time where we were being asked by a lot of our constituents in higher ed, do businesses care? And it's nice, right? Because we have the UPSIA and Collegius report from the spring. We have the SHRM report that says, yes, they do. But where the conversations really moved in the last year is quality. So what's the learning experience? What's the quality? What's the evidence of competency or skill attainment? What level of skill or competency? So we're getting to those quality assurance type questions. And I'm excited about that. Patty shared earlier her care for, and I have a deep care for those adults with some college no degree. So this is a way to help them be greater participants in our economy and gain some social mobility and economic mobility. But the other piece that we also experience, and we're on the road speaking about this quite a bit and engaging with lots of different partners, is, what's the strategy? How do you get to the strategy? And we have done a lot of work around the strategy. So there's strategy questions from higher education, there's quality questions from employers. And for me, I think the thing that I care most about is, how do the systems connect, right? So will this really help a learner, a worker learner, get a better job and access to career? And we all know that once you're into a benefited salary job, there are things like tuition assistance that Walmart does a great job at, right? That then unlocks even more opportunities. And so that's, I've been very focused the last year on calling out the need for greater attention to human resource information systems, those the inability of those systems to consume new types of credentials and maybe not even do the job we think they're doing deeply concerns me for all of our citizens or anyone in the world that's earning a micro-credential. So that's kind of what I'm observing and experiencing.
Absolutely. Now, and just as a quick housekeeping note, I know that there's going to be a fair number of questions that come up over the course of today's discussion. So please do use the Q&A tab to share your questions, and we will tackle them towards the end of today's call. Now, Luke and Ken, I want to turn to you guys a little bit just to talk about your experience on the ground in the institutional context. I'm curious how each of your institutions are approaching alternative credentialing and what benefits, both at the institution level and learner level, you're seeing stem out of these offerings. And Luke, we'll start with you here, please.
Yeah, so we've been on the journey from digital badges to micro-credentials. And I always have to give a shout out to Goodwill Industries International, especially Goodwill San Antonio. We worked together on a Walmart funded project through Education Design Lab, and we really learned what it meant to serve the frontline worker. So we really started there, and we're now at a point where we have a digital badge taxonomy. We have a micro-credential guide to help our faculty members understand, where does this fit? How does it fit? We've issued a set of briefs, and I'll put them in the chat, of the work that we did around strategy, because we were very intentional. And so I want to share those with y'all. We published our work, like the actual work that we did, because we felt so strongly in the path that we followed, including personas, including just trying to define for ourselves so we could speak with clarity on what we were doing. We had a design team, and I can't say that enough, right? This work is a lot more fun when you do it with other people, and you do it with really smart people across your organization. We were fortunate to do that. Our team members are listed on that link. The last thing I would say is we begin to put structure around opportunity. we continued to be engaged by businesses and nonprofits, and even our own internal stakeholders that said, I want to credential some things that we are doing. And we created a skills lab, and we now have 4 staff members, and we're now pursuing a lot more robust credit for prior learning strategies so we can cross that learning into the credit environment, and really hopefully reduce those barriers long term between this false wall we've put up of credit and non-credit. So that's just a little bit about what we're doing. And I shared that link in the chat.
So good. And Ken, turning to you.
Sure. So we were very deliberate, right? I would say a year before COVID. I thought it would be about a month period of time to bring faculty and administrative leaders together to talk about micro-credentials and consider how we were going to use them. Well, it took 18 months to do that, and for very good reasons. So folks on the call that are thinking about developing or offering micro-credentials, to Luke's point as well, it's really important that you think about your taxonomy. It can be very complicated. Understanding the different levelings of badges. I put a link in the chat as well to ours, but having a taxonomy is going to be really important because everyone at your university or your business setting needs to very quickly and easily understand where they fit. So there's everything from participation to licensure, continuing education units. So your taxonomy needs to reflect a consistency of how you offer these micro-credentials to learners. I'll say we have, I'm going to simplify this and say we have 3 buckets. So at the end of the day, we're in the business of making sure that any of our learners have work-ready skills and can be competitive in the job market. That's the job of a university. Let's get folks ready for an education. So whether that's a non-traditional student, someone seeking upskilling, or a traditional age 4-year graduate, it always comes down to what are they learning? Are those critical and effective for making them competitive in the workspace and be successful? So our buckets are kind of current students that are matriculated, looking to develop or promote or reflect on workforce ready skills, in particular that are undergraduates develop through co-curricular activities as student workers or as part of traditional courses. So we understand, at least at UNH, we have over 6,000 undergraduate students that currently work part-time or are work-study students. And a lot of them are going to build skills and competencies in areas that are essential. So part of that might be communications, problem solving, working with interdisciplinary teams. So we built out a specific micro-credentialing platform just for those students with the idea of giving them an ability to reflect on their co-curricular activities in a meaningful way during a job interview. Our second bucket is really professionals seeking to upskill, and that's whether it's credit bearing or non-credit professional development. We do a fair amount of professional and executive education in the non-credit space, but let's kind of build on-ramps and blur that line between credit and non-credit through these micro-credentials. So we have quite a few 4-credit programs that non-matriculated students can take, and at the end they'll receive a micro-credential that validates their work within that taxonomy I mentioned. And then our third bucket is really the non-matriculated student again. So looking for ways to provide lower commitment entry points to a formal degree program.
And Patty, turning to you now, the Walmart Foundation is doing some really interesting work in micro-credentialing. You've published research recently with UPSIA, which is the University Professional and Continuing Education Association. I'm curious about why Walmart has gotten so involved with the micro-credentialing movement in general, and the impact that partnership has had on both the education community and the wider community that Walmart Foundation aims to serve.
Such a big question. But I'll what I would say is that yes, we have been, as the Walmart Foundation, we've really been working on essentially what we're terming, a transformation of our workforce and talent systems to be more skills based and competency based than not, because we actually believe that, if you literally look at our frontline associates, they're, our associates are, there's 1.2 million of them, right, around the world. Most of those folks have skills that they have actually built and honed over time, sometimes in formal situations, sometimes not, sometimes on the job, sometimes in military service, you name it. And they've got a host of skills that often are not recognized in the right ways, right? So we went about starting to think of, we went about how do we think about ways that we can recognize that learning that happens, that we can give credit, I suppose, to all of that learning and skill building. And then over time, how do we actually help people build those skills, right? Whether they be informal, degree types of situations, which is totally fine with us, or not, right? In more non-traditional ways of getting that. So we've been at it for a while. And I would say, for your question around APSIA is kind of one of many things that we've been doing. So we've been working first in trying to change employers' minds, right? To get them to come to the same place that we are. So, nice little statistic for us, 75% of our managers and our folks in home office have come from inside of Walmart, and they probably started in a store, and many of them did not start with degrees. Some of them got degrees along the way, but that's in our DNA. And we're like, it's worked for us. It's an important way of thinking about your talent and how do you invest in your talent and grow them. So it kind of starts there, and started with how do we bring other employers along? And then when you sort of look at it, then you're like, okay, then there's a lot of those education providers that are non-traditional education providers that are really doing a nice job at this point of really helping address some of the skills gaps, if one wants to put it that way, as we go. And then we're starting to think, okay, well, let's think bigger. How do we think about this with our 2-year and 4-year institutional partners? How do we start to sort of, make skills and competencies be the currency rather than the degree being the currency? Degrees are important. They're important for a lot of things, but we still want to know what those skills and competencies are when you come out at the end of that degree, right? So how do we do that? So our partnership with APSIA is exactly that. We're like, hey, all right, who are the organizations within higher ed who are looking to try to help with some of this transformation? And there's a lot of, and as Ken and Luke have really said, there's a lot of transformation that has gone on already, and we still have a ways to go, right? And what we're hoping to do also as Walmart is, how do we help tie all of that back to employer demand, right? Those skills, what are they? We don't necessarily want it to be 100% about let's just train them for the things that the employee, the jobs that are available today. That's not it. But employer, there's a mismatch, and there has been over the last several years of how we think about our jobs and the skills and competencies that are needed for those jobs. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to stay on this topic of employer engagement, because I think, this is really where the rubber is going to hit the road on the broad adoption, the broad acceptance of alternative and non-degree credentials. So I'd love to talk a little bit about some best practices that higher ed institutions can put into place to collaborate, with local level, regional level, and national level employers to develop and scale alternative credentials. So Ken, I'm going to swing around to you to kick us off on this one, please.
Well, this is also a big question, and I've been looking at the chat, and one of them was talking about how can we compete in an environment with third-party vendors as a university like LinkedIn Learning. And, to that end, I think the answer is addressed in this question. And it's really, we are not trying to be LinkedIn Learning within our micro-credential portfolio. So it's really the way to be, I believe, to be successful is building strong partnerships with industry or industry associations. We are a trusted resource in the state of New Hampshire, so that is a benefit. We can, I think one of the best practices is to have some sort of advisory, business and industry advisory council that works within your university to really understand and hear from different types of businesses, real estate, computer, advanced manufacturing, AI, what in their jobs do they wish their new employees had for skills, or their current employees will need in the next 2 to 3 years as things in technology continue to change rapidly. So having that conduit where you have kind of this living group of people that come together as an advisory group to help you identify where as a university you're going to place your effort in the micro-credential space. So, best practice is not to be all things to all people, and think about what is your particular special sauce as a university or a community college or an organization, and then how can you use that with really strong partnerships to develop meaningful credentials. And I'll just say, there is a lot of confusion and concern because we're kind of reaching the crest where everyone's getting into this space, and it kind of dilutes what they are when there aren't necessarily best practices that everyone agrees to. So my micro-credential that I provide for X, Y, or Z at UNH, is that worth the same thing that university or college Y provides? And the answer is probably not. And that's what comes down to those kind of the metadata that's contained within a micro-credential that really spells out how skills and competencies were validated and what it took to get this. So I think we're in an interesting place where there's a lot of people jumping into the space. Now we've got to do the hard work and figure out how to make sure we continue to tie it into the workforce, and that we can do it in ways that are kind of interoperable between organizations that provide these.
Absolutely. Patty, coming over to you.
Well, I was going to see if Luke wanted to jump in first, and then I'll happily.
That makes sense.
Because my sense is Luke, from the perspective he's coming from, will have some overlap with some of the things I'm thinking about too.
I think one of the biggest surprises for me, I had not done a lot of employer engagement until the micro-credential work in the way that I do it now. And I was surprised about the conversation we were not having. And I'm talking about higher ed entering the conversation. One, we're not entering as an employer. We're an employer. We employ people. And we act like there's this, oh, you're the employer. We're employers. Two, we're not asking the right question of the business. Like, what's your most pressing need? What's your hardest to fill job? What is the skill that you're really after, right? The other thing is, we're not asking for authentic partnership either. It's like, hey, Patty, do you have staff members that can teach at my program? So I've got the facilities, I've got the curriculum, but I need the talent, right? That knows what you know. And so and then do you have some investment that you can bring in equipment and whatever else it may be, right? Experimentation, internships, externships. And the most important is there a clear path back to your company, right? That's the post-completion outcome piece is just missing in the conversation. And I would say, for me, what I hope the part of my career will contain, right, is this helping to make sure that the right conversations are happening and the connection from the learner to the opportunity, which is what they care about, is happening. And I really liked what Ken said, but what my mind was all on is that there's an institutional perspective, but what about the learner? And one of the things that we have done well, and I hope we continue to do, is focus on that learner and build around that learner and think about how they're doing the learning within their life and work and volunteer and parenting and whatever else. But most important, like, how do we help them make that transition? So anyway, that's kind of where my mind went, but the conversation with the business needs to change. And I think there's a playbook. I actually think there is a very easy playbook that can occur. But saying that, Patty, I'm really interested in if you have a reaction or you had a different area you want to go.
No, so like I was hoping that's where you're going to go, Luke, just because I know the work that Ed Design Lab does. But I would say from a Walmart business point of view, our most successful partnerships are in the type that you're talking about. It's getting not, yes, maybe a staff member to come teach, but at minimum, it's about really doing more than being advisory. Honestly, it is somebody who is engaged in this. This is the kind of students that we need. These are the skills, like they're like, and our teams are willing to do that. They really are. They've never been asked to do it necessarily, but they definitely are willing to do it. They care a lot. And the interesting thing about our teams is that they're much more willing to trust their local community college and their local four-year institution than the community-based education provider, just to be super frank about that. And that's in the quality piece, right? So coming back to what you said, Ken, so that's something where we can sort of, we have trust in the fact that you can teach not just the individual skill, but also sort of those work readiness, some of those other, whatever you want to call them, soft, durable skills, that we have confidence that that's there. So the quality piece is really important to an employer, because I ultimately don't want to have to sort through all of these. I can't figure out which one's good. But if I've established a relationship with you, I understand that's going to come out good. Aligned to, and I think you're also super right, ask us the questions around what are the key skills that you need today, and what are you looking out 5 years from now? The 5 years from now, right now, we're a little bit in a, like, as a whole, Walmart is panicking about our 5 years from now, right? What impact is AI having on everything? We're looking at many more tech types of jobs, but they're not real, like they're not like software development, but they need to have a certain set of skills that we don't, that we're like, we kind of don't even know what those are. We've made a commitment to have a completely electric trucking fleet in the next 10 years. Who is maintaining those trucks? You know what I mean? We have to figure all of that out, and we would absolutely want trusted partners for that. And that's what we go searching for. So we, even at Walmart, so we depending in different markets, we work with various local community colleges and four-year colleges, but then in our home office, we do too. So we're looking for those. And the last thing I would say is that the piece, Luke, of like getting an employer to commit to the hiring at the end of it. They'll do it. They will. People always feel like, oh, I won't ask for that close. Like it's kind of a sales close. Like, yeah, ask for it. If we do this, how many people are you going to hire? How many people do you, and even if it's 10, but we're going to build a pipeline for you. You've got to ask for it. They will in fact do it.
Yes, thank you. I 150% agree. But we have to ask, right? Like we've got to ask, how many do you hire a year? And to Ken's point, maybe you can't support that 10, but you have another partner that can. And I would also say this just real quickly, off of something Ken said. I also think it's about where you live in the world, about all things to all people. A lot of people don't realize San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the United States and growing. And so there is a lot more pressure to serve different verticals. But to Patty's point, like you need to resource the relationship. And that's the last statement I've made, is that from the higher ed perspective, you've got to resource that relationship. And Patty, I really think it's worth repeating. It's more than inviting Walmart or whoever to be on a program advisory council. It's got to go deeper than that. And I'm so glad you said that. Those are your words. And so I just wanted to elevate them and call them out again. I think it's very important for the audience to hear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, what's interesting, what always strikes me about the micro-credentialing movement is it speaks to a slight reframing of the role of the post-secondary institution in supporting folks transition or folks continuous improvement or skill development experience from being, very almost reactive and internally focused to being more externally focused and proactive. And it also starts to suggest a role for the post-secondary institution beyond again, being responsive to the needs of employers at points in time, to being proactive and almost consultative in how employers can start building lasting skill development structures that are really oriented to the strategy of the organization. There's a repositioning that becomes really, really exciting, facilitated by the flexibility that the credentials afford. I am curious though, because the research that Walmart and UPSIA collaborated on highlighted a belief from respondents that institutions aren't necessarily strategically prioritizing alternative credentials. So I'm curious, and now in fairness, we're now asking panelists who are very much prioritizing alternative credentials, but I'd be curious as to why you think that that gap may exist. And Ken, again, I'll start with you here.
Should I be politically correct? No, I think higher ed is going to continue to prioritize this segment of learning as a necessity due to kind of changing demographics of traditional age students and changing demographics of students who want a 4-year resident or a 2-year resident experience. With that said, it comes down to dollars and cents too. And the bread and butter of a university is their traditional student tuition revenue, room and board revenue. That by far contributes, 200 full paying undergraduate students that stay with your institution for 4 years is worth thousands of learners that are popping in and out for a credential here or there. So I don't know that, the university has to adjust to a changing landscape of their traditional student. And with that is going to come more priority given to a micro-credential space. Our law school at the UNH Law has done a remarkable job in this space. So they've kind of dismantled a traditional doctorate in law, so the JD, and kind of dismantled it into pieces that were more interesting to a broader number of individuals. So they broke them into different credentialing pieces, and are doing similar things with an MBA. So yeah, it's going to take on more interest, I think, for 4-year institutions as a whole, and it has been. But at the end of the day, you're fighting the value of a traditional 4-year resident person and what impact that has on a budget comparatively.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to speak to the financial model. I think there are 2 reasons. One is when I talk to my colleagues and I talk to anyone that engages with us, right, when we're out and about different events, the key is we can't figure out the financial model to deliver it. One, some of that gets to the right partnerships and having the right conversations. We covered that. The second piece is that the second thing that I hear, Ken, is people can't decide where to start or who's the learner they want to focus on. And in our insight briefs, we did persona work. And I want to acknowledge there's criticism of persona work. And I would say that's valid if you don't go test it. And we spent a year, we ran 3 different market tests, meaning we paid money to advertise, right? Just plain and simple, and validated our personas. And I still questioned one. I was like, there's no way. We're not after this group until they showed up in my house. Until my 20-year-old bounced back from university and pursued a micro-credential, right? So I am a strong believer if you can figure out the financial model, then really try to hone in on who are you trying to serve or what industry are you trying to serve? Are you spending time with those clients, customers, if it's the business or if it's the learner? But that's good work. And it probably will save you time, money, and effort if you're to do that.
Yeah, so just to clarify for the listeners, I think this is incredibly important work, or I wouldn't be doing it. But if you think about, I'm the president of a university and I need to focus on what's going to keep them solvent. Right now, it's the traditional age residential student. It's it's a profit loss statement, unfortunately. That doesn't mean that higher leadership at the university level doesn't think this is incredibly important, because it is. And I think the tack we're trying to take at UNH is to arm our traditional age individuals with the ability to, in addition to their transcripts for their academic program, they will also, within that, have a transcript of their essential skills and competencies that they've developed, or their micro-credentials. So if we can build it into the fabric of a traditional age student at UNH, then there's going to be more resources given to that. And then as we get more resources for the traditional age student work, those resources will spill out into our non-traditional student access points.
Yeah, I would agree. We're pursuing some of those same things. And I would say, and prepared for what happened a couple of weeks ago when the coding boot camp completely shuts down and leaves hundreds of students, right? We're ready with the micro-credential opportunity to welcome them in 24 hours, right? So sorry, Patty, I saw you came off mute.
No. And the only thing I would add to this whole conversation is and I'm trying to decide whether this reason is more of an excuse or whether it's a real one, but it's certainly the perceived notion that there is an employer demand. There is not employer demand for micro-credentials. And that's what we're trying to change from this side. Yeah. There can be, again, but aligned and of quality. And, to come back to something you said earlier, Ken, it's got to be portable also, right? So that credential I need to be able to ingest it into my system or go across states, or what, you know what I mean? Like that, the data and the technology behind these is very important as well, or it doesn't do us any good.
Absolutely. And Patty, I want to stay with you as we close out sort of our moderated portion of this discussion before we hit the Q&A. I'd love for each of the panelists to kind of walk through a vision of how you all expect demand for and the positioning of micro-credentials to evolve over the next 5 years. So Patty, just staying with you.
I would say the positioning of it. No. So I think the vision for us is that we have actually succeeded in transforming, again, our education and workforce talent development system into a skills and competency-based system. Can we do that in 5 years? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it's 10. I'm not sure. But ultimately, we believe in this system, and what we want to be able to see is a lot more, frankly, economic opportunity and economic advancement for those who have just really been kept from it at this point, because they are able to, do learning in the way they need to do learning, and stack that learning in the ways that they need to stack that learning, to advance in the ways they want to do that, right? So that's the ultimate high level vision from our perspective. There's a lot between now and then to still be done.
Luke, pivoting over to you.
I said it earlier, and I'll come back to it. Patty pointed it out, so did Ken. The connection of the micro-credential into the hiring system, the ability of the hiring system to not only ingest that information, but signal to a hiring manager, hey, There's someone that's got the skill you're after. I was at the largest employer in San Antonio a year ago, and I expected to hear very technical things about roles. But what I heard was critical thinking 12 times, right? In the course of a 90-minute session, right? Where we got to watch the lead hiring managers talk about what they needed most. So that's, for me, do the systems work? And are they really going to do the job that we want? And for us, our moonshot, the Alamo Colleges District, is to end poverty through education. I think most people know we have the largest amount of urban poverty in the United States. So we're extremely focused on social and economic mobility. We think this is one way, but it can't be done if the systems don't connect. And to Patty's point, if the demand or the need is not fully recognized, and the opportunity by the employer.
Absolutely. And Ken, coming to you for the last word on this one.
Oh, goodness. I think in the next years, credentials continue to represent a paradigm shift. This paradigm shift is really at its core about inventions of credibility in education. So I think as a result of that, over the next 5 years, we're really going to see kind of more encrypted personal learning records that are portable. Blockchain exists. It can be used to allow portability and validation. I think as universities or institutions of higher ed all over, as we do what we must do, which is build relationships with industry to continue the dialogue and make these valuable, we're going to see an increase in use. So I think to the point that Patty was making, we really need to have industry drive the relevance of what we're doing in this space. And we, as the issuers of micro-credentials, need to come together around their validation, consistency, portability.
Well, with that, we're going to pivot over to the Q&A section, and sorry, Kristen will be leading that discussion. Thank you all again for taking the time, and just to answer one of the questions that I did see pop up in the chat, a recording will be sent around to everyone. So even if you need to knock off a few minutes early, you'll have the full recording at your disposal later.
But we do invite you to stay because for at least the 10 remaining minutes, because we have some really good questions in the queue. And then have a question or two for all of you as well, that we'll do a quick, super quick poll at the end. But this question came in early on, but the topic seemed to have arisen during your discussions. Is anyone hearing anything about expecting a national micro-credentialing standard? Patty mentioned, actually multiple of you mentioned transferability or cross states, or there was another question similar yet different about remote workers. There was a lot of talk about working with your local employer, but we also have a lot of folks now that work for employers that are not local. So does anyone have any comment on national standards or that transportability?
I would just comment there's work on open skills standards and taxonomies. There's work on open standards around technology. So the interoperability that we were speaking to is done. So there's some really good work happening with group like Open Skills Network, One Ed Tech, and others. I haven't heard of a national standard. I think there are other groups like Credential Engine, Patty mentioned, that are really focused on cataloging, right? So do we even have a source of all of these options? But I'm not sure that we'll get to a national standard, but I don't mean to appear pessimistic.
I'm gonna let Ken see if he has something to say before I jump in there.
I think if you look around, there are different organizations that provide frameworks that X number of people use most of or some of. As a national micro-credential framework, education.gov, the NEA provides, the National Education Association provides some kind of best practices around micro-credentials, but they're not, there's not the same accreditation that you see in a degree space. So there's not the same level of consistency.
Yeah. So what I would say is not yet. And I also, so in terms of, we're funding a lot of what Luke just mentioned. We fund some of that work. The challenge on the standards part of it is, what question are we answering with that standard? And is it a quality standards? We can think about that, and which could be, there's sort of, is it a learning quality, proficiency quality type of standard? Is it as an outcome based type of quality? Because so there's a lot of work thinking about that. There is some work that is starting around how might we think about accreditation in this kind of world. I don't know that much about it, but I will in about in a few months, because I'm going to dive into it. So it's what I think is, it's a really good question. The challenge is kind of, there are multi dimensions to what micro-credentials, how we think about what lens we're looking at micro-credentials with. And since there are those multiple dimensions, you have to sort of think about what's the right way to address each one of those there. So stay tuned. Let's see what we come up with.
Thank you. So I'm going to slightly tweak the way this question is worded. So there was a question about what seems to be the most appealing or ability to offer in terms of micro-credentials. Is it skill specific, such as, customer service, inventory control, or Patty, you mentioned the electric truck maintenance, or is it more cognitive or attitudinal, what it's workplace skills? Someone was mentioning critical thinking, team building, or is it all of the above? I think that could go to any of you.
So I'm going to point to, I'm going to see what Luke has to say about this one, just because I know Ed Design Lab's perspective on this, and I'm curious how you guys have implemented it there and out at Alamo.
I liked how you talked about the multi-dimensionality of this whole issue. So I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Like Ken, if we want to really expose skills that are being taught within our curriculum already, then it's very much about the competencies of that skill, right? If it's to an audience in our community that is very interested on, I need to have a family sustaining wage, then we are looking at specific micro-credentials that lead to specific jobs. And those are the questions that we get, right? So what the questions that we get from learners are, what does this lead to? Is there really a payoff? And I would answer it, both ways, right? It depends on the learner and how we situated the opportunity just within our micro-credential ecosystem. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I actually really love that answer, which is sometimes not a useful one. It depends. I would say you hear from employers that they want both. That we say, excuse me, I'm going to end up coughing. We end up saying, we can probably teach you the specific skill for our specific job, but I can't teach you the sort of the cognitive skills that surround what we need you to do. So how can you come prepared for some of that?
Great, thank you. So we've heard a lot from all of you. We would like to pause just for a second and ask a question of our audience. We have just two really brief poll questions. Peyton, if you could go ahead and pull those up so that you can provide some feedback to us on this webinar, the engagement with our panelists. I think this has been fabulous. It's been so interesting. I've been taking lots of notes, and we have a lot of questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but if you could please just answer these two quick questions. I know we are coming up to the very end here, and we do expect that this is a conversation that will continue on, that we will have the opportunity for more webinars, more engagement with all of you out there across the country, actually, and across the world, looking at the chat here. And then, of course, as we see you all at conferences and such along the way. But I think this has been a wonderful opportunity to hear all the different perspectives and allow folks to ask their questions. We are keeping track of the questions that did not yet get to be answered, and we will try to make sure that we can follow up with you with some answers. I actually may tap into you three again just to give a quick a reply to those answers, and we can document them. But as was mentioned before, the recording will be shared with everybody as well. And we always invite you to reply to us if you have any questions or you want to be connected to folks. We are happy to be here to be able to do that. So with that, and looking at the clock, I think I will say thank you all. First, Patty, Ken, Luke, Amrit, thank you all so much. I think I loved how this continued to ebb and flow, and you're all working off each other's answers, and it's nice to see a lot of agreement and collaboration and opportunity that is coming for not only the employers, but our communities, our society, and the educational institutions as well, that all of this affords us. So thank you all again. I appreciate your time and energy and efforts, and we appreciate you. And thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.